Starting with the first argument, we've already established that we should always use a cell reference for our lookup value so that our function can be reused or copied easily. If we want to find out the price of a brownie instead, all we have to do is change cell C11 and the price in cell C12 will auto-update to the correct price. Now, one question to ask is whether or not the lookup value is case sensitive. We can actually find this out ourselves by just altering the case in cell C11. Let's make it all caps and then see what happens. Great! This tells us that the lookup value is not case sensitive because our function still works fine. Now, before we move on to the next argument, we need to establish perhaps the most important aspect of how VLOOKUP works, and that is that the lookup value must be in the leftmost column of your table array. Suppose we wanted to look up what desserts are served by the restaurant Sprinkles. The natural thing to do would be to change the value in C11 to Sprinkles, and then update the third argument in the VLOOKUP function to the number 1, since desserts are in the first column, and that's what we want to know. Now if we press enter, we receive an error. This highlights one of the main limitations of the VLOOKUP function. Even though the lookup value Sprinkles is well within our table array, the VLOOKUP function can only look up values in the leftmost column of a data range and not in other columns. This is why you may hear people say that VLOOKUP can only look right and not look left. If we double-click on cell C12 and update the table array so that the restaurant names are in the leftmost column, we will now be able to look up the value Sprinkles, but we will only be able to find a result value that is in a column to the right, so price or customer ratings information. But since we want our function to return dessert information, we can copy our restaurant data and paste it into column A so that it is now to the left of the dessert column. Now, what changes do we need to make to our function so that it still works? The first argument stays the same, but we need to update our second argument, which is our table array, so that it covers column A as well. We will see the colored shading update to cover our new table search area. Now the column index number should be 2, since dessert items are now in the second column from the left. The fourth argument doesn't change, since we still want an exact match, so we can press enter. And we have a result, so our function has definitely worked. Excel tells us that apple pie is a dessert served at Sprinkles, which is true. However, before we get too excited, you may be wondering what happens to our toffee pudding. If we look at our first column, Sprinkles occurs twice, and therefore 2 desserts are served at Sprinkles. This brings us to another limitation of the VLOOKUP function. This function works for the first occurrence of lookup values only. So Excel will search the first column for the specified lookup value, and as soon as it finds it, it will go across the row until the results column specified and then return the result accordingly. If you are dealing with multiple occurrences, keep in mind that there are some ways to get around this by using nested functions and other functions such as index or match. Now that we know what we have to keep in mind for our lookup values, which is our first argument, let's move to the next argument.